Where are the commitments for the Florida State Seminoles?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your jobs for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. There has been a really strange trend with Florida State not getting commitments, even though they've had a ton of effort put into this recruiting class. So to begin the show, we're going to talk strictly about what's going on with Florida State, as well as a trend that is just odd to me that I don't remember ever happening in over 30 years of following recruiting. So here's the overview with FSU and then a little broader view nationally. Number one, Florida State really isn't moving the needle to the point where they're getting quote unquote public commitments. Now, I know there's always these silent commitments, this, that, and the other. I could care less. Either you openly commit to school X, Y, or Z, or you do not. And then B, in addition to that, are you still taking visits? Right now, Florida State's not getting that done. But then I started looking around. Auburn, Alabama, Miami, Florida, all these different schools, Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, etc. This is a national thing. So I'm like, what is going on? Why is everybody suddenly waiting as long as they possibly can? Because all these kids that I talk to at camps, combine, 7-on-7s, on the phone, whatever it is, they all seem to want to have it done by early June, maybe by the end of June. But a lot of these kids have always popped on visits or right after. It's not happening this year. I think there's number one theme. I know I've mentioned this on the show before, but now I'm 100% convinced, especially talking to a couple of my sources today. They're as dialed in as it gets because they train, etc., some of the best players in the country. It's the money the kids are getting on the visits, period. In case you didn't know, NIL reasons, under the table, whatever, a lot of these kids are getting paid a lot of money just to show up at schools for the visit. Sometimes unofficial, sometimes official, whatever. That's hard to turn down. Now, this doesn't mean that it's good for me because it makes content a lot harder, and it certainly doesn't make it better for the college coaches because you think you got a kid reeled in, but they're going to get $5,000 just for going and taking a trip, which is free most of the time, by the way, because it's an official now. We're in official visit season. That puts a wrench in things. That also means there's going to be an absolute, unequivocal landslide of commitments coming up because eventually you got to commit. It's got to happen. And it will be almost impossible to follow because it'll just be a recruiting bonanza across the country. It is what it is. We don't get to dictate what 17-year-olds do, and I don't think half the time they know what they're doing either, but I'm just throwing that out there. Second point, as it relates to Florida State, just the way that Norvell and his staff has set it up, and I think it's a beautiful thing. Long-term, again, it's not great for content right now, but they have over 20 players that will visit beginning this next weekend. Over 20. Now, that can change in about 1.1 nanoseconds because that's the other thing. Because of the money with NIL and all this, these kids are changing visits like I change my socks daily. It is ridiculous how much the visits are changing around the country. This is not a Florida State thing. This is across the board. It is impossible to follow. I've lost track of how many times I've been told a player has been added to a visit list like he's going to show up in a couple hours. Not like a few days, a couple hours. Why that is, I have no idea. I've never seen it like this much before either. I'm guessing, again, it's about money. So the NCAA is not really sanctioning anything, and it's beyond the Wild West. There is no control whatsoever in recruiting. Just throwing that out there. So I love to give recruiting predictions on a lot of kids, this, that, and the other. This year, I'm really not going to do it because the NIL is just dominating the scene. And some kids are mad about what they are or aren't getting. That's part of the other thing with it too, where they think they should be and what coaches think is often a very long way apart. I had a conversation at length with a trainer today about that, and it's it's just negotiation. Sometimes that stuff gets ugly, and sometimes people part ways, even though they were leaning towards the school. They let money dictate the answer, and that's unfortunate, but that's going on with a few kids I know about, and I'll leave it at that. Here's the deal, though. With over 20 players coming in, and I'll go over some of them here in a little bit, but we'll go more in depth as the week goes on. Florida State has backloaded their visits. Why do I think this is good? Number one, again, a lot of the kids are going to make their decision soon. The last visit will be with Florida State that they're going to remember. Nothing wrong with the June 7th or June 14th, whatever. But if you get the very last one, it's the freshest thing in your mind. That's good. Two, we're not talking about a good list just because of numbers. But there's another kind of number. Elite status, 4 and 5 star players for a reason. Josh Petty and different players across the country coming in from Georgia, Florida, etc. This is about as good as it's going to get. Next weekend's visit list for Florida State, in addition to the players they've already had on campus, is elite. Period. Maybe all of a sudden Florida State is the hot team at the end of June. All is forgiven if you go from a handful of commitments to, oh my goodness, we're at 15. I don't know if it will work, but this is honestly the exact same thing Bowden used to do. Florida State was a slow starter, but a incredible finisher in recruiting in the Bowden era. There was nothing even close because they backloaded and just they rolled the dice. I mean, they were very risky with recruiting. They always were. Then signing day was early February, the January 20th or so, whatever Friday that was, and then like the 27th or 28th. Those weekends, Florida State would take is half the kids they end up signing would be from those 2 weekends, if not more. That's just the way they always did it. Looks like Norvell and his staff are kind of going that way too. They had really good kids on campus this past weekend. I'll probably touch on that a little bit more tomorrow as well. I want to go in more detail, so just give me some time. But there hasn't been any commitment, which, again, Florida hasn't had any. Miami hasn't had any. Auburn only got one this weekend. Bama might have got one. Florida's last commitment was a punter from Maine. I mean, this has just been bizarre. So there's just not as much to talk about as I thought. I've heard a lot of rumors about who's leaning where. But again, with NIL, I'm a little leery to think that this is an opportunity for Florida State or anybody else to get all up in arms one way or the other, good, bad, or indifferent, because it's a little more incredibly difficult really to project which kids are leaning. NIL's made it very, very hard for me. So with that said, we'll talk more specifics about that here tomorrow on Locked On Seminoles. I'll kind of go through the list, but note that again, today, this is a really unique situation without any commitments from any of the big three, Florida, Miami, or Florida State, after an official visit weekend where all three had big-time players on campus. It's just kind of a national phenomenon. Here in just a moment on Locked On Seminoles, we're going to keep it with recruiting, but we're going to talk about quarterback recruiting in 25 and 26. There's another trend happening because the National Signing Day is not going to be the same after this year. Barring something unforeseen, it's going to move to June, early July next year, which completely changes the recruiting calendar and a lot of pressure on every coaching staff, Florida State included. And that means you got to get ahead of the curve. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's why you should hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, you don't have all the time and the resources to wait it out. LinkedIn is constantly giving you different ways to make the process easier, even launching a new app that helps you with the descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses are actually using LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great opportunity for you, and you should check it out. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Next up, let's talk a little bit about the opportunity for Florida State to look at quarterback recruiting. Obviously, it's the number one position that you have to recruit and manage. The roster's always manipulated one way or the other with transfers, whether you want it to or not. It's just the dynamics of it. But you want to recruit as many good players as you can, and hopefully somewhat local if you can. But for whatever reason, historically, the state of Florida is not necessarily the greatest state for landing quarterback talent. It's always been pretty mediocre, to be honest, among the southern states. I don't know why. It's just something we've always talked about in this state. But the elite quarterbacks that go to the NFL, very few have been from Florida. Jeff Blake's might be the best guy in the last 25, 30 years as far as high school, college, and pro career. There's a few other guys you could make an argument for, but consistent all the way through, he's probably the best. He's from Seminole High School and ended up at East Carolina, then played for the Bengals a long time, ended up 15 years in the National Football League. Florida State is in a unique situation, though, because right now, Tramel Jones from Mandarin High School in Jacksonville is committed. We'll come back to him in a second. And then the class of 26, the rising junior class, is by far, in the history of the state of Florida that I know of, the greatest group of quarterbacks the state's ever seen. So I just want to present that in twofold. Here's the issue. Tramel's committed, but he's still looking at UF. Checked in with some people. The people around UF feel good about where they stand with him. I don't know if that's true or not from me talking to him and his dad. I've never felt that was necessarily the case, but they're not going to give me all that information. They know that I cover Florida State, so it's a little awkward to talk about that. But I just never got the impression that UF was that strong a contender. But the people in Gainesville think totally different. Oftentimes college coaches are way off, but maybe they aren't this time. Hard to say. With that, I know Florida State, like every other school, they continue to do their due diligence and they recruit other kids and stay in contact with other players in case things go sideways with Tramel or anybody else at another position too. And there are other options, but it is just really unique that nothing seems to come of the visits with UF, but they kind of hang around. I don't know if there's going to be a conclusion to it. And if eventually Florida State's just going to be like, either you've got 100% commit, no more visits, or we're taking somebody else. How does that work? And the answer to that for me is I have no idea, because that's a gut feel type of deal. As quarterback coach, Tony Tokar's, the entire staff really, because even if you're a defensive guy, quarterback recruiting goes wrong, it's bad. You cannot make up for missing at quarterback. If for some reason you end up with a goose egg in a quarterback position for any class, it's probably going to bite you at some point down the road. Even with the portal, there's no guarantees. You want to recruit and develop your own guys at the signal caller position. So that's something to think about. The other thing is this, and it's, again, here's the key. Barring something unforeseen, and we all know by now, the NCAA is about as consistent as a dog's hind leg. It's crooked. They are planning to move up the signing date. I don't know the exact date, not this year, but next year's class, the rising juniors, to summer. So they got less time. And it's almost like you're recruiting two classes at once in the same level. June 15th is when all the kids that were going into their junior year could get direct texts and all that kind of stuff. Well, here's the deal. There are several players, again, that are committed or in the state that can go to, a lot of programs that are quarterback in the class of 26. Well, several have committed already. Here's the list. Noah Grubbs, elite player. Florida State passed on offering him. They're about the only school they did. Kind of surprised me. He committed to Notre Dame. Will Griffin from Tampa Jesuit. He's a kid that just committed to Florida. Diabell committed to Texas today. He's a kid Florida State had hosted for a visit. He's an elite recruit. He's from American Heritage in South Florida. Just committed to University of Texas. Brady Hart, from what I heard, I never asked him, only met him once. He has ties to UF, but again, they've got Will Griffin. I don't think Florida State's involved there. I could be wrong. He just got an Ohio State offer. That's always tough to beat Ohio State for a quarterback recruit, but we'll see. Maybe Florida State will be involved. It's hard to say, but there are only so many guys. Eventually, you're kind of wondering, is Florida State going to miss on all the guys in state when it's just, for whatever reason, an incredible year? There are a couple other kids too in Orlando that are really, really good. There's a kid at Seminole, there's a kid at Edgewater, et cetera, that can play here. Carter Emanuel, et cetera. They're really good players. But over half are already in the fold for another school, depending on how you want to rank elite or whatever. But there's about 6, 7 guys that I think could play at Florida State in some capacity. Half are committed. maybe a little more. I don't know if Hart will go beyond somewhere in the middle of the season or early after, and I'm not sure Florida State's really involved. So I'm not really sure it matters how you want to count him committed or not. It would just be unfortunate if you allowed all these kids to go to schools not named Florida State. It's something to think about because, again, I don't remember a class ever like this. There's been years, there's 2 or 3, but like there are 6 or more kids that are on Florida State's level in one class in the state. It's very, very, very unusual. So it's something to think about. And you know what? If it happens, it happens. And like I've said many times before, Florida State is the one school since the portal opened and there's been immediate transfers that gain eligibility that has done better with the portal than anybody. Florida State staff figuring out fits. But I still think it's best to get the high school kids, especially if you can get a local quarterback to help you recruit the other, the running backs, the offensive linemen, the tight ends, the receivers that this state produces. You would love to have the quarterback. Just kind of throwing that out there. It's unfortunate if they don't. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about just kind of briefly go over the list before we go into more detail tomorrow on the list that coming up for this next weekend, because again, there are over 20 kids coming in and there's some elite prospects. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. Visit FanDuel. You're going to have an opportunity to do a lot of things coming down the stretch. We're getting to the end of summer. There's a lot of baseball going on, NBA finals. You've got an opportunity to do everything and looking at the futures with the NFL. All of it you can check out on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. By the way, $200 is a lot more than normal. I don't know why it's $200 right now. That could change next week, but it's $200. So make sure you take advantage of that. So you get $200 to use on everything from finals MVP to who you're going to get somebody to hit a home run in a game, whatever it is you want to do on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So this coming weekend, again, is a big one, and I just want to give an overview. I'll go into details tomorrow's show about the list and why it's so important. Florida State has set it up this way. Here's their shot. They're taking the last visit before a lot of these young men finalize their decision. And Florida State probably hopes even a few more do after the visit as well, because they do such a good job. And it's important. Again, this is an overview. I'm just going to mention a few kids and talk about it from a perspective of how good the overall group is. More of a big box look. But just off the top, I see at least 5 guys that I would consider 5 stars. There's a couple. I'm looking at 24/7's list so I don't miss anybody. But there are 4 at least, if not 5. There are a couple on the fence, but there are at least 7 or 8 guys that are top 100 recruits just for one weekend. And to also put it in perspective, like Jalen Wiggins is coming. He's not a top 30 kid, but you could argue Jalen as a defensive lineman, a very unique one that's 250 pounds, is the most important recruit on the board because he's from Tallahassee and he's committed to Florida. You cannot lose kids from your own city to your arch rival. That is self-explanatory. He committed early to Florida. And again, I heard recently that UF feels pretty good about him. You're getting him on campus again, though, on the June 21st weekend. That's important. They got kids from Texas. They got kids from South Florida. They got kids from IMG. Georgia, all over the place. It's incredible how many different areas they've got players from. Tramel Jones, we just talked about quarterback's going to be on campus. It's a really important group. Also, Greg Thomas, who's probably the most likely of the quote-unquote uncommitted recruits from this month, is going to be visiting. I'll be shocked if he does not pick the Noles. He's selecting later this month. This is an important group, folks. They need to get these guys. I talked about Michael Hasty recently. He's a kid coming in. This is a tremendous group. Also, just a quick note, starting tomorrow, Jared Smith, Ben Hanks, Jadon Blair, Nicholas Clayton, 4 guys coming in. So midweek visits. I'm not a crazy fan of the midweek visits, but traditionally those are during a season, and it's just not as fun on campus during the week as it is the weekend. But nobody's on campus right now at any of these schools, so it's all the same. I've heard Jadon Blair is almost a lock for Notre Dame. I really don't know much about Clayton. Ben Hanks Jr., his dad, obviously played at UF. That could be any of the in-state Florida schools. Why not Florida State? They've done a pretty good job recruiting him. And then Jared Smith, he plays at Thompson, arguably the best program in the state of Alabama. He's a kid that I've met. He's got size 18 shoes. He's a defensive end. Again, Florida State, as I've said a bazillion times on this show, they've got to recruit D-line better. So he's somebody else that's coming in as well. Over 20 kids this week, counting the midweek visits, visiting the Knolls. We're going to go into depth a little bit more tomorrow, but I cannot stress to you enough how important it is that they get it done, because this is your shot. This is the way you planned it out, Norvell and his staff. I like the plan, but now it's time to capitalize. So again, we'll talk about that more on Locked On Seminoles. So please hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and share this podcast, and comment on YouTube and give us a 5-star review on Apple. I'd appreciate it. This has been Locked On Seminoles.